Today, we will be talking about how to raise your child to be bilingual. Now, before we start, you may ask, why do we want to bother raising our child to be bilingual? Is there any benefits? Well, studies have shown that bilingual individuals have better executive functions. Now, executive function is basically a set of mental skills that help you to reach and prioritize and plan to reach your goals. Bilingual individuals have also shown to have lower rates of cognitive decline as they age and later onset of Alzheimer's. It has also been found that bilingualism also changes the way we perceive the world. For example, certain languages may have names for different types of colors, and as a result, we find that those individuals can perceive changes in those colors a lot quicker. Some languages have different uses of time, and we see them order materials differently. And some languages don't actually have numbers. They don't count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And some language, the use of grammar is also different. They may describe objects as male or female, and we see the description of those innate objects in those terms. So when do babies start learning language? Well, at the third trimester, baby can already detect the mother's voice. When infants are born, they have the ability to distinguish difference in phonetic units of all languages. Babies start learning language before they can even speak. As babies grow older and become exposed to a particular language, they have a reduced ability to perceive difference between speech sounds that are not common in their native language. The effect of these changes in perception occurs at around age 1, which coincides with the age of the child when they begin to acquire word meanings. For example, in Japan, R and L are not separate sounds, and as a result, you'll find a lot of Japanese people have difficulties distinguishing between R and L, such as rake and lake, ramp and lamp. They also have difficulty pronouncing words such as work and walk. And we can see this effect through studies. For example, at 8 months, a Japanese baby and American baby both are equally good at distinguishing words with R and L. But by 12 months of age, we can see that the Japanese baby have greater difficulties distinguishing R from L, and we can see that the American babies, they become better at distinguishing R and L. Brain has a user or loser principle. As we can see from this diagram, your nerve cells that gets activated more often, gets myelinated, and they become faster at processing those information. And we can see that the brain starts specializing in those regions dedicated to processing sound at a very early age. And areas, that sounds that you don't get exposed to, those areas sort of just dies off a bit. And babies learn through frequency statistical analysis, which means that the more often they hear it, the better they are at learning at it. And as we can see from this diagram, that language development occurs over a predictable sequence manner in both the perception of language and the production of language. Okay, another component of language is syntax. Syntax are basically rules governing the language, such as grammar. And when we think about it, including ourselves, if we're native speakers of a language, we never really stop to think how we apply our grammar. The grammar is automatic. And babies learn syntax via the same method through frequency association. For example, a young infant may hear a sentence such as Bob is going home and Bob was going home, and they're able to associate between is and ing and the word was and ing. And different language have different syntax. And different syntax are processed in different areas of the brain too. And our ability to learn syntax does decrease with age, with time. And our semiotics are the meaning of the words, and that also decrease with time. And in regards to semantics and syntax, we can see that those type of skills are best learned before puberty, and we're not quite sure why, but our ability to learn a new language does decrease dramatically by the time we reach puberty. This is just a picture showing us the different neural pathways of newborns and adults, which isn't quite mature yet. And how we learn a new language also differs too when we're young compared to when we're older. As we're a bit younger, we tend to use our hippocampus more in terms of acquiring a new language. And as we progressively get older, we use our broadcast areas in the brain. And going back to syntax, the different language have different syntax, and that actually activates not just the different areas in the brain, but also results in different neural pathways. And the myelation of those pathways also differs too. An example of difference in syntax is that in German, where they have quite a lot of syntax and a lot of rules. For example, in German, you may describe a bridge as a moon as male or female, and you activate different neural pathways. Whereas in English, the syntax, the grammar isn't as many compared to German. And for example, Chinese, the grammar and the rules governing the language are even less. But in Chinese, the interesting thing is that although it has less rules governing the language, the way you pronounce words, there's more variation in the ways you pronounce words. For example, words such as A, you may pronounce it A, 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 and they all have different meanings. And the myelations of these changes in syntax starts beginning at 3 and may continue up till their age 10. And this also reminds me of studies in the past where if you learn chess when you're really young compared to when you're adult, how you process a position of chess pieces on the board differs. For example, we find that young children who learn chess earlier on, they process the positions of the pieces on the board more in the occipital lobe, closely related to the region where they process people's faces, whereas adults that learn chess later on, they process it more in from memory, their frontal lobe area. And again, as we can see, your ability to acquire grammar does decrease with age. Okay, this is a study looking at the number of words a child is exposed to, comparing it to different income groups. And in this study, look at different vocabularies, Okay, and we can see that children from higher social economic backgrounds are exposed to more words. What we found that the duration of conversations are generally longer. And we also found that people from higher SES, not only do they provide more words, but they also provide more praises, whereas people in welfare tend to talk to their child in a more negative reinforcement manner. And we can see later on as the child reaches by age 9 and 10, this has an impact on the child's vocabulary and their reading comprehension. Okay, now we know that learning language is good to learn to expose your child early, but how should we go about doing it? Is it sufficient to put a young infant from the TV of a foreign language or audiobook? Will that be enough to stimulate their brain? Well, this study looked at Chinese babies and American babies. And in this study, they separate the groups into three. And one group, an American babies exposed to both TV and audio. That's this middle one here. And in this one here, the American babies are exposed to Chinese language intervention. And this one here is just a control. So as we can see, exposure, just simply putting your child in front of a TV, CD, computer in foreign language doesn't really have much impact on the ability to learn that language. Whereas if you have active engagement of the child with another adult, they tend to perform equally well as the Chinese babies in picking up differences in phonetics. So we can clearly see that we need to have a social engagement between the age 0 and 12 months. So language sort of have it's evolved with a social context. You really need to have social engagement. One way to check to see if your young child is engaged or not is if they're looking at you. Now this may differ when the child gets older. Maybe they don't need as much social face-to-face engagement. And it's also important to read to your child so they can be exposed to different syntax and vocabularies. Now, practically speaking, one good way to help your child or infant learn a foreign language is through songs. And I can see my toddler, she's able to recite to me in different languages of songs that she has no idea what she's talking about. I still remember when she was around 2, she was able to sing to me Twinkle Twinkle Little Star. However, I strongly doubt that she understands what any of those words mean. Okay, there are basically 5 different scenarios in your household when it comes to bilingual parents and the infants. The first scenario is that both parents they use the minority language, which is the language that's not common in the environment, and they restrict the use of majority language at home. In these cases, we find that the child tend to retain the foreign language a lot better. The second scenario is that one parent exclusively uses the minority language at home and the other parent uses both language. And over the long run, we find that children still retain that foreign language ability, quite well, reasonably well. And then we go to the third scenario where both parents use both languages at home, including the majority language. And generally speaking, we find that the kids can learn their foreign language but not to the same extent. And the third scenario is that one parent uses one language. In these cases, that one parent may use a minority language, and other parents use the majority language. And the child generally retains the ability of foreign language, but not to the same degree. And the fourth scenario is that one parent use both minority and majority language, and the other use majority language. And we usually find that those kids don't retain as much ability in their foreign language. So one of the challenges I find in trying to raise my child to be bilingual is the amount of time and effort that you have to put in. And I commonly see that parents that are bilingual and their child lose their ability to speak the foreign language. For example, I have seen cases where one parent speaks Mandarin and English, and their wife speaks Cantonese and English, and the parents share a common language, which is the majority language, which is English, and as a result, the child only learns English. And yes, and that's definitely a big challenge. So what I do at home is I'm currently using the one child, one language method. Now I'm only doing this because my child isn't going to school yet, so she isn't really exposed to the majority language. And I'm just hoping that you'll help lay her down those neural pathways early on. And as she goes to school, I may switch to having the minority language predominantly at home and exclusively. I mean, what are the things that you can do? The great news is that your local libraries have rhyme time and story time. Same with the state library. They also have pop-up libraries, which that in Queensland, the government have librarians visiting your local parks to do rhyme time. You can always attempt to host homestays at home or have online talk sessions with foreigners. You can hire nannies that speaks a foreign language. You can utilize your grandparents if they speak a foreign language. Or you can pay an older playmate, someone from university that speaks a foreign language, or you can attend playgroups that speaks in a foreign language, or you can even move to a new country. Thank you for your time. Oh yes, I highly recommend reading these two books if you're interested more on this topic.